Imagine it's 2019. You're standing in the parking lot of a luxury apartment complex in Dallas, Texas. Not the penthouse tier. The aspirational tier. The kind of building with a rooftop pool that photographs well but closes at 9 p.m. because of noise ordinances. You're 34 years old. You drive a leased BMW 3 Series. You have a closet of clothes with labels people recognize. You eat at restaurants where the menus don't list prices. You've been to Tulum twice. Your Instagram suggests a life that others envy. And your net worth is $11,000. Not your income, your net worth. Everything you own, minus everything you owe. $11,000, less than what your car payment costs you annually. You are not an outlier, you are the median. According to the Federal Reserve's 2019 survey of consumer finances, the median net worth of American households aged 35 to 44 was $91,000. But that number is deceiving because it includes home equity. Strip out the house, and for renters in that bracket, the median liquid net worth hovers near zero, sometimes below it. These aren't poor people. These are people earning $80,000, $120,000, $175,000. People with titles, people with degrees, people who, by every visible indicator, appear to be doing well. They wear the costume of wealth, they perform the rituals of wealth. But behind the curtain, there is no wealth, only velocity, money moving through their lives like water through a sieve. This isn't a failure of income, it's a failure of design. A failure of understanding what wealth actually is, how it's actually built, and why certain behaviors that feel like winning are mechanically forms of losing. This is the autopsy of 8 spending patterns that simulate prosperity while systematically preventing it. And once you see the mechanism, you can't unsee it. Here's what most people never learn. Wealth is not what you spend. Wealth is what you keep. This sounds obvious when stated plainly, but the entire consumer economy is engineered to blur this distinction, to make spending feel like having. To make consumption feel like accumulation, to create a psychological experience of richness that has no mathematical relationship to actual richness. The feeling of wealth and the fact of wealth are two separate phenomena. And in the modern economy, they have been deliberately decoupled. This isn't accidental, it's structural. The financial system that emerged in the late 20th century needed consumers to spend faster than they earned. Credit systems, marketing infrastructure, and cultural signaling all evolved to create a specific behavioral outcome. The transformation of future earnings into present consumption. The conversion of income into liabilities disguised as assets. The slow, invisible liquidation of financial futures in exchange for immediate sensation. The 8 patterns I'm about to describe aren't moral failures. They aren't character flaws. They are predictable responses to a carefully constructed environment. Each one exploits a specific psychological vulnerability. Each one creates a specific financial trap. And each one has historical precedent that shows exactly how it ends. This is not about judgment. This is about mechanism. Pattern 1, the new car ritual. The first wealth destroyer is the most normalized, the purchase of new automobiles. Well, let me be precise. I'm not talking about owning a car. I'm talking about the specific behavior of buying new vehicles repeatedly, financing them, and trading them before they're paid off. In 2023, the average new car loan in America was $40,850, with an average monthly payment of $726, stretched over an average term of 68 months. That's nearly 6 years of payments for an asset that loses roughly 20% of its value the moment it leaves the lot, and another 15% by the end of the first year. This isn't disputed. This is the mathematics of depreciation. And yet, the new car purchase remains the single largest financial transaction most Americans make repeatedly throughout their lives after housing. Here's what's happening beneath the surface. A new car is not experienced as a liability. It's experienced as a reward, a milestone, an identity marker. The brain processes it as a form of arrival. You have made it. You can afford this. The new car smell, the untouched interior, the admiring glances in traffic. These are sensory confirmations of status, and they're intoxicating. But the mathematical reality is different. What you've done is convert $40,000 of future labor into a depreciating object. You've agreed to pay $726 per month, plus insurance premiums that are higher for new vehicles, plus registration fees that are higher for new vehicles, plus the opportunity cost of that capital not being invested. Let's run the actual numbers. $726 per month invested in an index fund averaging 8% annual returns over 30 years becomes approximately $1.07 million. That's not a typo. One car payment redirected for 3 decades becomes $1 million. This isn't theory, it's compound interest. Now here's where the trap deepens. Most people don't keep new cars until they're paid off. The average American trades in their vehicle after 4.5 years, which means they're often rolling negative equity into the next loan. They owe more on the old car than it's worth, so that difference gets folded into the new financing. The debt snowballs. The payments never end. The cycle continues. This pattern has a historical precedent. In the 1920s, General Motors pioneered the concept of annual model changes specifically to accelerate this cycle. They called it planned obsolescence. The idea was to make last year's car feel outdated, to create psychological dissatisfaction with functional vehicles, to engineer desire for the new. It worked. A century later, it's still working. The mechanism is simple. The car feels like wealth. The car costs like wealth, but the car builds no wealth. It extracts. Pattern 2, the subscription layer. The second wealth destroyer is quieter, less visible. It operates in the background, pulling small amounts continuously rather than large amounts periodically. Subscriptions. The average American household now carries 12 active subscriptions, with average monthly spending of $219 on recurring services. That's streaming platforms, gym memberships, software, meal kits, apps, cloud storage, news sites, grooming products, curated boxes, premium memberships. The list is endless because it's designed to be endless. Here's the mechanism. Each individual subscription is priced at the threshold of psychological insignificance. $9.99, $14.99, $19.99. These amounts don't trigger deliberate evaluation. They fall below the threshold where your brain performs cost-benefit analysis. You don't ask, is this worth it? Because the amount doesn't feel worth asking about. This is not accidental. It's behavioral pricing. Companies know that a $15 monthly charge generates far less resistance than a $180 annual charge, even though they're mathematically identical. The monthly amount gets absorbed into the background noise of life. It becomes invisible, and that's the trap. Invisible spending is uncontrolled spending. When researchers at West Virginia University surveyed consumers in 2022, they found that the average person underestimated their subscription spending by 133%. People guessed they spent around $86 per month. The actual number was $219. They had lost track of their own recurring expenses. This is how wealth leaks. Not through big decisions, but through small, unexamined ones. Through automatic renewals you forgot you authorized. Through free trials that converted to paid plans while you weren't paying attention. Through services you used once and never again, but never canceled. $219 per month is $2,628 per year. Invested at 8% over 30 years, that's approximately $322,000. A significant portion of a retirement, drained through recurring charges for services barely used. The historical precedent here is subtler but instructive. Before the subscription model, companies faced a different problem. They had to convince you to buy again. Each transaction required new persuasion. The subscription model eliminated that friction. Once you opted in, momentum kept you there. Inertia became the business model. Economists call this status quo bias. Humans disproportionately prefer the current state over change. Canceling requires action. Continuing requires nothing. So continuing wins, even when continuing makes no sense. The subscription doesn't feel like spending. It feels like maintenance, like keeping things running. But the math doesn't care what it feels like. Pattern 3, the restaurant default. The third wealth destroyer is the normalization of dining out. Let me be clear, I'm not talking about occasional restaurant meals. I'm talking about the structural shift where eating outside the home has become the default, not the exception. In 1960, Americans spent roughly 26% of their food budget on food away from home. By 2022, that number had risen to 55%. For the first time in history, Americans were spending more on restaurants than on groceries. And the cost differential is staggering. A home-cooked meal costs, on average, $4.31 per serving. A comparable restaurant meal costs $20.37. That's nearly a 5x multiplier. For the same nutritional outcome, you're paying 5 times more to have someone else prepare and serve it. Now factor in delivery apps, Uber Eats, DoorDash, Grubhub. These platforms add a 15-30% markup on menu prices, plus delivery fees, plus service fees, plus tips. A $15 meal becomes a $27 transaction. The convenience premium is enormous. Here's what's happening psychologically. Dining out has been reframed as self-care, as treating yourself, as living life. Social media has elevated food photography to an identity expression. The restaurant meal is not just sustenance, it's content, it's experience. It signals taste, sophistication, cultural engagement, but it builds nothing. Every dollar spent on food prepared by others is a dollar unavailable for everything else. And these dollars accumulate in ways people don't track. A household spending $400 per month on dining out versus $100 is leaking $3,600 per year. Over 30 years at 8%, that's $440,000. The price of convenience is often the price of a comfortable retirement. The historical precedent is the transformation of the American kitchen. In the post-war period, home cooking was default infrastructure. Families had the skills, the time, and the cultural expectation to prepare meals. Over 3 generations, those skills degraded. Time pressure increased, dual-income households became the norm, and the restaurant industry scaled to fill the gap. This wasn't a choice. It was an adaptation to changing economic conditions. But the financial consequence remained the same. Outsourcing food preparation means paying the labor and profit margin of someone else's business. That cost compounds invisibly across a lifetime. The meal feels like a reasonable indulgence. The math feels like nothing because no one's running it. Pattern 4, the address premium. The fourth wealth destroyer is the aspiration to live at the maximum of your affordability. There's a standard formula lenders use. Your housing costs should not exceed 28-30% of your gross income. This is presented as responsible guidance. But here's what most people miss. The formula is designed to describe the upper limit of what you can afford. The ceiling, not the floor, not the target. The maximum before stress. Yet culturally, it's become the goal. People hear you can afford up to $2,800 per month and start shopping at $2,800 per month. They anchor to the top of the range. They select the most expensive neighborhood, the best apartment, the house at the edge of qualification. This is where the trap closes. When you live at 30% of income, you have 70% remaining. But taxes take 25-35%. Savings guidelines suggest 15-20%. Transportation takes 10-15%. Food, utilities, insurance, healthcare. By the time you reach discretionary spending, there's often nothing left. Or worse, there's a deficit that gets covered with credit cards. The address premium is real. Living in a prestigious zip code costs more for the same square footage. Living near trendy restaurants costs more than living near functional ones. The premium isn't for housing quality, it's for location signaling. You're paying extra for the ability to say where you live. And here's the deeper mechanism. Expensive neighborhoods come with expensive defaults. The grocery store is Whole Foods, not Aldi. The gym is Equinox, not Planet Fitness. The coffee shop is $6 lattes, not homebrew. Your neighbors drive new cars, wear certain brands, vacation in certain places. Social comparison takes over. Your spending rises to match your environment. Economists call this reference group influence. Your spending is shaped less by your income than by the spending of people around you. Move into a wealthier neighborhood, and your behavior drifts to match. Not because you want to impress them, because their behavior becomes your norm. What was once a luxury becomes an expectation. The historical precedent is the post-war suburban expansion. As highways enabled white-collar workers to commute from leafy suburbs, housing became stratified by income in ways it hadn't been before. And that stratification created lifestyle silos. Each tier developed its own spending norms, its own consumption expectations, its own definition of normal. The house or apartment at 30% of income feels like smart financial behavior. It's technically affordable. But affordability and optimization are not the same thing. The maximum you can carry is not the amount you should carry. Let that sink in. Pattern 5, the wardrobe treadmill. The fifth wealth destroyer is the continuous renewal of clothing and appearance. This takes 2 forms, and both extract wealth through different mechanisms. The first is fast fashion, the $15 shirt, the $30 shoes, the $50 jacket. Cheap enough that replacement feels trivial, so disposable that trends can be followed in real time. The emotional lift of shopping, the novelty of new items, without the guilt of major expense. But here's the hidden math. Cheap clothing degrades quickly. The $15 shirt lasts 5 washes before it's misshapen. The $30 shoes wear through in 3 months. The $50 jacket pills in 1 season. Replacement is constant. The per-wear cost often exceeds that of quality items that last years. This is the paradox of cheap goods. They feel economical at purchase and prove expensive over time. Samuel Vimes, the fictional character from Terry Pratchett's novels, articulated this as the boots theory of socio-economic unfairness. A rich man buys $100 boots that last 10 years. A poor man buys $20 boots that last 1 year. After a decade, the poor man has spent $200 and still has wet feet. But the modern wardrobe trap isn't just about quality, it's about volume. The average American buys 68 garments per year. That's more than 1 new piece of clothing per week. Closets are overflowing with items worn once or twice. The cost accumulates, not through individual purchases, but through frequency. The second form is the premium brand trap. This is the opposite strategy. Expensive items purchased for their signaling value. The designer handbag, the luxury watch, the branded sneakers. These purchases are justified as investment pieces that hold value or quality items that last forever. Some do, most don't. Fashion brands have learned that scarcity in logos command premiums that have nothing to do with durability. A $100 handbag is not necessarily more functional than a $120 one, but it communicates something. And that communication is what you're paying for. The mechanism is status anxiety. Visible consumption signals success. Designer labels serve as social shorthand. They say, I belong to this tier. The problem is that tiers are always relative. Someone always has a nicer bag, a rarer watch, a newer sneaker. The treadmill has no end. The historical precedent is the sumptuary laws of medieval Europe. Governments literally legislated what each class could wear because clothing was such a powerful status signal. The laws were unenforceable and eventually abandoned, but the underlying psychology never left. We still dress to communicate rank. The clothes feel like self-expression. The brands feel like accomplishment, but neither contributes to financial stability. Their consumption dressed as identity. But pattern 6, the lifestyle raise. The sixth wealth destroyer is the automatic escalation of spending with income. This is perhaps the most insidious pattern because it operates invisibly, as a default rather than a decision. Here's how it works. You get a raise. Your income increases by $10,000. You feel like you've made progress, and so you reward that progress. You move to a nicer apartment. You upgrade your car. You shop at better stores. You eat at better restaurants. Within months, your spending has risen to match your new income. Your savings rate remains unchanged. Your wealth accumulation remains unchanged. The raise has been fully absorbed into lifestyle. Economists call this hedonic adaptation. The human brain adjusts to new circumstances with remarkable speed. The nicer apartment, which felt luxurious in month 1, feels normal by month 6. The newer car becomes the baseline. The better restaurants become routine. The pleasure fades. The cost remains. And here's the trap. Each increase becomes the new floor. People don't downgrade lifestyles voluntarily. Once you've lived in the nice apartment, the old apartment feels like a step backward. Once you've driven the newer car, the older car feels inadequate. Ratcheting up is easy. Ratcheting down is psychologically brutal. So income rises, spending rises to match, and the cycle continues. The person earning $50,000 saving nothing becomes the person earning $150,000 saving nothing. The numbers scale, but the structure doesn't change. The historical precedent is striking. In the 1950s, the average American savings rate was approximately 11%. By the 2000s, it had fallen to under 3%. Income had risen substantially over that period. But spending had risen faster. Wealth wasn't being built. It was being dispersed as quickly as it arrived. The mechanism is default behavior. Without intentional intervention, spending expands to fill available income. Like a gas filling a container, the only way to prevent it is to redirect money before it reaches discretionary accounts, automatic transfers, forced saving, structural barriers between income and spending. The raise feels like progress. It feels like getting ahead. But without changes to the underlying system, it's just running faster on the same treadmill. Pattern 7, the experience. Premium. The seventh wealth destroyer is the elevation of experience over everything. This one is tricky because it emerged as a reaction to materialism. The cultural narrative shifted. Things don't make you happy. Experiences do. Collect moments, not objects. Travel more. Do more. Live more. This isn't wrong as a philosophy. The research does suggest that experiential purchases generate more lasting satisfaction than material ones. But here's where the mechanism gets complicated. Experiences have been commercialized at a scale that wasn't possible before social media. Travel isn't just about seeing places anymore. It's about documenting them, sharing them, curating an identity through destinations. The experiential economy has merged with the attention economy, and the cost structure has changed accordingly. A week in Bali costs $2,500. A music festival costs $800 plus travel plus accommodation. A destination wedding costs attendees $1,500 minimum. These are presented as essential life experiences, as things you can't put a price on, as investments in memory and meaning. But you can put a price on them, you just don't. That's the point. You can't put a price on experiences framing is a psychological trick. It removes spending from cost-benefit analysis. It makes financial evaluation feel crass. Of course, you should go to that wedding. Of course, you should take that trip. What kind of person wouldn't? This creates social pressure that's impossible to resist. Experiences are publicly shared. If everyone in your circle does a European trip this year, opting out feels like failing. The experience becomes an obligation disguised as an opportunity, and the costs are substantial. The average millennial spends $5,000 annually on travel. That's not inherently problematic, but it is problematic if it's substituting for retirement savings, emergency funds, or debt payoff. The experience premium is paid by future self. Here's the historical precedent. The grand tour of the 18th and 19th centuries was an aristocratic ritual. Young, wealthy Europeans traveled the continent as a marker of education and refinement. It was a status performance disguised as cultural enrichment. Instagram travel is the democratized version. Same performance, different medium. The experience feels priceless. The experience feels like living fully. But the experience has a price, and that price accumulates in ways no one adds up. Pattern 8, the financing illusion. The eighth and final wealth destroyer is the normalization of financing for everything. There was a time when financing was reserved for major purchases, a house, a car, maybe education, items whose utility extended over years and whose cost exceeded reasonable savings horizons. That time is over. You can now finance a couch, a mattress, a phone, a laptop, a vacation, a dental procedure, a fitness bike, a wardrobe. Buy now, pay later has extended credit to every corner of consumption. And here's why this matters. Financing separates the decision to acquire from the pain of paying. The purchase happens now, the cost happens later, spread over months, in amounts that feel manageable. By the time you've paid, the item is no longer new, the emotional connection has faded, but the obligation persists. The total cost is almost always higher. Financing includes interest, even when marketed as 0% APR. Those offers typically increase the item's base price, or impose penalties if a payment is missed. The math is designed to extract more than the sticker price while appearing not to. But the deeper issue is behavioral. Financing trains you to think in terms of payments, not prices. The question becomes, can I afford $50 per month? Rather than, do I need a $600 item? This reframes every purchase. A $1,200 phone becomes $50 per month. A $2,400 Peloton becomes $100 per month. A $5,000 vacation becomes $200 per month. Each individual payment feels manageable. The total picture is never assembled. What emerges is a tower of obligations. Subscription payments, loan payments, financing payments, minimum payments. Each one small, together enormous, and the revenue from income is committed before it arrives. There's no slack, no margin, no capacity to save. The historical precedent is the explosion of consumer credit in the 1920s. Department stores introduced installment plans. Sears and other retailers allowed purchases to be spread over months. The pattern accelerated the consumer boom and also accelerated the collapse that followed. When incomes dropped in the Depression, those payments didn't. Defaults cascaded. We've rebuilt the same structure, only more sophisticated, more accessible, more normalized. The financing offer feels like flexibility, like an option, like a way to get what you want now and figure it out later. But later always arrives, and it arrives with compounded obligations. Let's step back and look at the pattern. 8 behaviors, 8 ways of spending that feel like prosperity but function as extraction. Each one individually justified, each one socially normalized, each one mathematically corrosive. Here's what connects them. None of them produce assets. All of them produce liabilities disguised as lifestyle. The new car, the subscriptions, the restaurants, the premium address, the wardrobe, the lifestyle inflation, the experience collection, the financing stack, all extraction, zero accumulation. And this is where the real constraint becomes visible. Wealth is built through one mechanism only, spending less than you earn and directing the difference into appreciating assets. That's it. That's the entire equation. Every alternative is a detour. But the modern economy is engineered to prevent that equation from functioning. Advertising creates desire. Social comparison creates pressure. Financing creates access. Lifestyle inflation absorbs gains. The system is optimized for throughput, not accumulation. The person caught in these patterns isn't stupid. They're not irresponsible. They're responding rationally to the incentives placed in front of them. The problem isn't individual failure. The problem is systemic design. And that design has consequences. Look at the retirement projections. The median retirement savings for Americans aged 55-64 is $134,000. That's enough to generate approximately $5,000 per year in sustainable income. Social Security provides around $22,000 per year for the average recipient. Combined, $27,000 annually, below the poverty line for most regions. This isn't because these people earned too little. Many of them earned plenty. It's because the money moved through instead of staying put. Because spending felt like living and saving felt like sacrifice. Because the short-term rewards were tangible and the long-term costs were abstract. The historical precedent is every consumer society that prioritized present consumption over future security. Post-war Britain. Pre-crisis Greece. Bubble-era Japan. The patterns rhyme. The outcomes converge. Here's what nobody wants to hear. Time is the asset that can't be recovered. Every year of high spending and low saving is a year of compound growth that doesn't happen. You can't go back and invest your 20s differently. You can't reclaim the growth that would have occurred. $1 invested at age 25 becomes approximately $21 at age 65 with 8% average returns. $1 invested at age 45 becomes approximately $4.60. The math is exponential. Early years matter disproportionately. This creates an irreversible constraint. The person who spent their 20s and 30s in lifestyle extraction cannot buy those years back. They can change behavior at 40 or 50. They should change behavior. But the optimal window has closed. There are only 3 options at that point. Work longer, spend less in retirement, or rely on systems that may not exist as promised. None of them are painless. That's the trap. This is not an optimistic topic, but patterns, once seen, can be interrupted. The mechanism that defeats these 8 traps is structural, not willpower-based. You don't resist temptation, you remove it, automate savings before money reaches spending accounts. Live on 50-60% of income, regardless of how much that income grows. Drive cars until they're economically useless. Cook the majority of meals, rent below your maximum, buy fewer, better things. Question every subscription quarterly. Avoid financing anything that doesn't appreciate. These aren't novel ideas. They're the behaviors of every generation that built wealth before consumer credit became infrastructure. The paradox is that these behaviors don't feel rich. They feel like restriction. And that's exactly why they work. Wealth isn't a feeling. It's a number. It's assets minus liabilities. It's what you own minus what you owe. And it grows only when income exceeds outflow consistently over time. The feeling of wealth can be purchased immediately. The fact of wealth can only be built slowly. Every behavior I've described trades the second for the first. So here's where we end. You now understand the 8 mechanisms. You understand the psychology behind them. You understand the historical patterns that confirm them. You understand the mathematical constraints that make them costly. The question isn't whether these patterns destroy wealth. They do. The question is whether you're currently inside any of them, and whether you'll remain there now that you've seen the structure. This is historical and educational analysis, not financial or investment advice. Your circumstances are yours, your choices are yours, but the math doesn't negotiate. The compound curve doesn't care about intentions. The retirement age arrives regardless of readiness. Most people will watch this, nod, and continue unchanged. That's not a prediction. That's what behavioral data shows. Awareness rarely produces action. The patterns are too comfortable. The alternatives feel like deprivation, but some will look at their car payment differently. Some will audit their subscriptions tomorrow. Some will ask whether the address is worth the premium. Some will let compound interest work in their favor instead of against it. The pattern is already in motion. The only question is which side of it you're building on. If this analysis reframed how you see spending, you may find value in continuing here. This channel exists to examine the systems that shape financial reality before those systems finish shaping yours. What most people learn too late, you can study now. I'll see you in the next one.